Welcome to my channel, and today I want to share a story that will take you on a journey of pride, humility, and hard-earned wisdom. It's about a young woman named Abeni who believed perfection in others was everything, yet failed to see the flaws within herself. This story will show you how chasing illusions can lead to loss, while embracing humility and kindness can open the door to real love and connection. Let's start. Abeni stood in the middle of the village square with her hands on her waist, her voice sharp and loud enough to cut through the afternoon air, as she faced a man who had just gathered the courage to ask for her hand in marriage. And with eyes full of pride, she laughed at him openly and said he truly believed he was worthy of marrying her, telling him to look properly at his fingernails that were darkened by honest labor, to look at his teeth that were not shining white, declaring without shame that she, Abeni, was the most beautiful woman in the entire village of Ilara, and could never lower herself to marry a man who was anything less than flawless. And the man, whose name was Kamau, felt his chest tighten with humiliation as murmurs rose around them, his face burning while he slowly turned and walked away with heavy steps. His dreams crushed in front of everyone, while the women selling peppers and cassava shook their heads in quiet pity. And Abeni's mother, Mama Zainabu, lifted her tired eyes to the sky and whispered a prayer, asking when her daughter would finally learn humility, unaware that the answer to her prayer was already moving like a shadow toward the village, because a lesson was being prepared, one that would shake not just Abeni, but the entire community. A lesson meant for a woman who demanded perfection in others while remaining blind to her own deep flaws, and to understand how everything unfolded, one must return 3 months earlier to a calm Tuesday morning when the sun had barely risen over Ilara, a village where life followed the rhythm of farming seasons and market days. And Abeni stood before her small, cracked mirror, staring at her reflection for what felt like the 100th time that morning, adjusting her head wrap, tilting her face left and right, admiring her smooth, dark skin, her bright eyes, and the smile that had made countless men lose their sense and their sleep. For she was 25 years old and blessed with beauty that people whispered about. Yet the elders often said that beauty was like dew on morning grass, shining briefly before disappearing under the sun. Words Abeni never listened to, because she believed her beauty was permanent, a crown she would wear forever. And as she admired herself, her mother's voice called from the kitchen, asking her to come and help pound yam. And Abeni shouted back that she was coming soon, though she did not move an inch, convinced that her soft hands were not meant for hard labor, fearing that rough palms would ruin the image she worked so hard to protect. And when her younger sister, Nyasha, came to the doorway to remind her that their mother was waiting, Abeni dismissed her by claiming she was still fixing her hair even though it was already perfect, causing Nyasha to sigh deeply before walking away. Because everyone in that compound knew that Abeni believed she was too special for ordinary work. And later that same afternoon at the market, Abeni once again turned attention into spectacle when a respectful man named Seifu, a skilled carpenter with steady income and gentle manners, approached her to speak politely about marriage, only for her to raise her hand to stop him mid-sentence and demand to see his hands, drawing the crowd closer as she inspected his fingers and loudly declared them too thick and unsuitable, mocking them by comparing them to tubers pulled from the soil, humiliating him until he walked away with his head lowered, while Mama Zainabu covered her face in shame from her vegetable stall, knowing her daughter was once again burning bridges without remorse. And that evening, as women gathered in the compound exchanging words under the fading light, Abeni pretended not to listen while gazing at her reflection, even as voices counted the number of good men she had rejected in just 3 months, listing doctors, traders, teachers, farmers, men of character and honesty, wondering aloud whether she expected a king from across the sea, prompting Mama Zainabu to admit with exhaustion that her daughter chased perfection without realizing she herself was far from perfect. Words that angered Abeni deeply and sent her storming into her hut, convinced that her standards were justified and her beauty unmatched, not knowing that whispers were already spreading through Ilara about a mysterious man soon to arrive. A man said to be so wealthy, so handsome, and so accomplished that even the proudest woman would desire him. And that rumor alone began to set the stage for the destiny Abeni was unknowingly walking toward. because while she spent her days oiling her skin, tying her head wrap with precision, avoiding chores and sending Nyasha to fetch water or sweep the compound, the village watched quietly, aware of the truth no one dared to say aloud, that beneath Abeni's beauty lived laziness, pride, and a heart hardened by praise she had received since childhood, praise that began the day she was born, after a long drought, when rain finally fell, leading a village prophet to declare her a child of blessing, words that caused her parents and relatives to treat her like fragile treasure, shielding her from responsibility and filling her ears with admiration until she grew believing she was above ordinary life. And so as the sun continued to rise and set over Ilara, and as Abeni repeated her list of impossible qualities for a future husband to anyone who would listen, fate quietly prepared to answer her demands, not with love, but with a mirror, one that would reflect her pride back at her in the most painful way imaginable. As the days passed in Ilara, the rumor of the coming stranger grew heavier in the air, like rain clouds before a storm, and Abeni's heart fluttered with excitement each time the women gathered at the market whispered about him, because she was convinced without doubt that destiny itself was finally bowing to her beauty and patience. And every morning she rose before sunrise, not to fetch water or sweep the compound, but to polish herself for the future she imagined, spending long hours bathing carefully, rubbing scented oils into her skin, adjusting her head wrap until it sat perfectly, and examining herself from every angle while Mama Zainabu called for help that never came, leaving Nyasha to shoulder the work silently as always. And though the women of the village openly laughed about Abeni's laziness behind her back, she remained blind to it, believing that her role in life was not to labor, but to be admired. And one afternoon, as she sat with other young women beneath the old mango tree in the village square, she once again recited her list of requirements for a husband, declaring he must be tall, handsome, wealthy, educated, widely traveled, neatly dressed, sweet-smelling, respected by his people, strong but gentle, intelligent but humble, and never dirty like a farmer, causing her friend Thandiwe to ask carefully whether such a man truly existed, only for Abeni to snap that settling for less was for women who lacked standards. Words that silenced the group because arguing with her always led nowhere. And it was that very evening that a dusty messenger arrived, ringing a bell and announcing loudly that a wealthy man named Chief Kofi Adeyemi was coming from the great city to find a wife, describing him as young, refined, educated, a broad owner of many houses and fine cars, a man of power and class news that sent shockwaves through Ilara and made unmarried women rush home to prepare their best clothes, while Abeni stood frozen in joy, her chest rising and falling as she demanded to know when he would arrive, learning he would come in 3 days and stay with the village head. A timeline that turned her nights sleepless as she imagined herself walking proudly beside a perfect man, blind to her mother's worried glances and Nyasha's quiet sighs. And when the day of his arrival finally came, the entire village gathered in excitement as a shiny black car rolled into Ilara, like something from another world, dust scattering as people stepped aside. And from it emerged a man who looked as though he had been carved from wealth itself, tall and broad-shouldered, with smooth skin, spotless white teeth, expensive traditional attire, and a scent that lingered in the air long after he passed. And Abeni's breath caught in her throat as she watched him greet the village head respectfully, speak with polished confidence and smile with effortless charm, convinced instantly that this was the man she had waited for. And when tradition required that all unmarried women step forward, Chief Kofi's polite gaze moved across them until it rested on Abeni, lingering just long enough to send heat rushing through her veins. Because his smile softened slightly when he looked at her, a change not lost on the watching crowd, and from that moment whispers spread that Abeni had finally found someone worthy of her pride. For within hours it was announced that Chief Kofi wished to court her properly, a revelation that left the market women divided between amazement and quiet suspicion, while Abeni floated through the village like a queen, already tasting victory. And when Chief Kofi visited Mama Zainabu's compound with generous gifts, kneeling respectfully and speaking with gentle admiration, Mama Zainabu felt unease settle in her chest despite his flawless manners. Yet she could not deny him permission, for by every visible measure he was everything any mother would desire for her child. And as the days of courtship unfolded with expensive gifts, sweet words, and grand stories of city life and foreign education. Abeni's confidence swelled beyond measure, walking proudly beside him as though she had won a prize meant only for her, loudly reminding doubters that patience had rewarded her with perfection, even as keen eyes noticed strange details, such as Chief Kofi's smile that never reached laughter, his irritation at children playing nearby, his discomfort at dust and animals, and flashes of cold anger quickly hidden beneath politeness. Signs Mama Zainabu and the older women exchanged worried looks over, knowing in their bones that perfection carried danger. But Abeni, drunk on validation and dreams of life beyond Ilara, noticed nothing at all, for her heart was already tied tightly to the illusion unfolding before her. Within a week, Chief Kofi Adeyemi announced his intention to marry Abeni without delay, explaining to the elders that business demanded his return to the city soon and that he wished for a grand Emi, traditional wedding to be held within 2 weeks. A declaration that stunned the village into excited agreement, because no one could remember such wealth and urgency ever arriving together. And when the bride price was brought, it exceeded anything Ilara had seen in years, silencing remaining doubts and sealing Abeni's pride completely. For she lay awake at night, smiling to herself, convinced that her refusal to accept less had finally proven everyone wrong, while Mama Zainabu stood outside praying quietly beneath the moon, uneasy without fully understanding why. And when the wedding day arrived, it came with splendor that transformed Ilara into something unrecognizable, with colorful decorations filling the square, endless food steaming in large pots, drummers and dancers brought from far away, and guests dressed in fine clothing, and Abeni emerged in white lace and coral beads glowing with satisfaction as she danced forward supported by her friends, drinking in the admiration and envy on every face. Certain that this moment confirmed her superiority, while Chief Kofi stood dignified and composed, his family arriving from the city in elegant attire, speaking polished English and observing everything with restrained expressions. And as traditions were completed and Abeni knelt to accept her new role as wife, she felt like royalty, though a sharp unease briefly touched her when her mother-in-law remarked coolly that she would need training to meet family standards, a comment brushed aside by celebration. In that night, when Abeni followed her husband to the rented hut at the edge of the village, eager yet nervous, she arranged herself carefully, lighting candles and wearing her finest cloth, determined to remain flawless even in private. But when Chief Kofi entered and removed his clothing, his demeanor shifted suddenly. As he pointed out a small patch of dust in the corner and ordered her to sweep it immediately, his voice stripped of warmth, reminding her that a perfect husband required a perfect wife, leaving Abeni confused and unsettled as she obeyed, believing it was merely wedding night tension. A hope shattered over the following days as her new life unfolded under rigid rules, with her husband waking precisely at dawn, demanding meals prepared to exact timing, inspecting food, clothing, and cleanliness with cold scrutiny, never shouting yet expressing disappointment through silence that cut deeper than anger. Forcing Abeni, who had never truly cooked or cleaned before, to struggle endlessly to meet standards designed for failure. And gradually the village noticed changes as she began appearing tired, rushed, and anxious, her once perfect appearance slipping under pressure, though she laughed off concern by insisting she had chosen a man with high standards, while Mama Zainabu saw the truth in her shaking hands and forced smiles, sensing fear behind her daughter's words. And the breaking point arrived one afternoon when a meal turned out too salty, and Chief Kofi pushed the plate aside with disgust, ordering her to remake it, causing months of bottled frustration to explode, as Abeni cried out that nothing she did was ever enough, only for him to respond, not with anger, but with a strange, heavy calm, as he asked her to sit and listen, revealing slowly that his name, wealth, city life, and perfection were all lies, that he was in truth Kwesi, a poor farmer from a neighboring village hired to play a role, that the car was rented, the clothes borrowed, the bride price contributed by villagers tired of watching her reject honest men, and that his treatment of her mirrored exactly how she had treated those she once mocked and dismissed. Words that shattered Abeni's world as he explained the plan was meant to teach her the cost of chasing perfection, asking her how it felt to be judged and found lacking every day. And as he gathered his small bag and prepared to leave, stating that the lesson was complete, Abeni collapsed in sobs, realizing that her perfect husband was an illusion, her perfect marriage a staged humiliation, and that the real tragedy lay in the good, imperfect men she had rejected. Love she could never reclaim, leaving her alone in an empty hut as the village watched the perfect man disappear like smoke, finally understanding that in demanding flawlessness, she had lost everything real. The morning after Kwesi walked away, Abeni woke on the cold floor of the empty hut, with swollen eyes and a body that felt heavier than stone. The silence around her louder than any insult she had ever spoken, because for the first time in her life, there was no mirror to admire her reflection, no praise to cushion her thoughts, only truth sitting beside her like an unwanted guest. And as sunlight crept through the doorway, she realized with slow terror that the village would soon wake and see her alone, abandoned not by death or war, but by deception meant to expose her heart. And when she stepped outside, whispers immediately followed her like shadows. Women pausing mid-conversation, children staring with curiosity, men exchanging knowing looks. And though no one mocked her openly, their silence burned worse than laughter, forcing Abeni to lower her head as she walked back to her mother's compound, where Mama Zainabu stood waiting, as though she had not slept all night, her face heavy with sorrow, yet free of surprise. And without words, she wrapped her arms around her daughter, holding her tightly as Abeni finally broke down completely, crying with the rawness of someone whose pride had been stripped bare. And between sobs, she confessed everything: the lies, the plan, the cruelty, and the realization that the perfection she worshipped had been her greatest enemy. While Mama Zainabu listened quietly, stroking her hair and whispering that lessons sent by life were often painful because gentle warnings were usually ignored, and news of Abeni's humiliation spread quickly through Ilara, stirring mixed reactions. Some women feeling pity, others quiet satisfaction, not out of cruelty, but because they remembered how her words had once cut them or their brothers deeply. And as the day passed, Abeni remained indoors, too ashamed to show her face, replaying every rejection she had delivered with sharp tongue and lifted chin, seeing now the hurt she had caused reflected back at her, realizing that the perfection she demanded had never been about love, but control. And that night, as the village settled into darkness, she lay awake listening to the distant sounds of night insects, understanding for the first time that beauty, without humility, was an empty shell, and that the lesson she had been given was only beginning to unfold. The next morning, Abeni rose reluctantly, her body stiff, her mind heavy with the memory of Kwesi's departure. She moved through the compound with the quietness of a woman who had lost command over her own life, avoiding the mirrors she once adored, and every glance at her reflection now brought shame instead of pride. Mama Zainabu watched silently as Nyasha performed chores with her usual diligence, the younger sister's hands calloused from years of work, hands that Abeni had always mocked in her vanity. For the first time, Abeni noticed the strength in them, the unspoken dignity of labor, and it stirred a conflicted ache in her chest. That morning she ventured to the market, not to flaunt herself, but to collect herbs for the family, her steps hesitant, head bowed as the villagers observed her closely. Whispers followed her, yet now they were tinged with sympathy rather than envy. Abeni passed by the spots where she had publicly insulted men, imagining their faces as they walked away, humiliated and hurt, and a deep sense of regret gnawed at her. The realization settled in. She had measured worth by perfection, never love. She had valued beauty over kindness, standards over humanity. By midday, she found herself seated beneath the old mango tree in the square, watching the women and children work, laugh, and live lives rooted in reality, not illusions. Their resilience struck her, a stark contrast to her shallow routines of oiling skin and arranging clothes. And slowly she understood the depth of her own folly. The market women, once wary of her arrogance, approached cautiously, some offering quiet words of advice, others simply nodding with gentle pity. And Abeni accepted these gestures, a humbling experience that she had never imagined possible. That afternoon, Mama Zainabu finally spoke, her voice calm yet firm. Abeni, you have been given what you asked for, perfection. But perfection is an illusion. The love you scorned, the men you mocked, all of them had hearts capable of truth. And you will need to learn to see the value in things that cannot be measured by beauty alone. Abeni remained silent, letting the words sink into her soul. For the first time, she realized that her mother's wisdom, ignored for decades, had been accurate. She had been blind to what mattered most: honesty, effort, and compassion. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden light over Ilara, Abeni returned to her hut and began preparing a humble meal for her family. She burned the first pot of rice, overcooked the beans, and spilled palm oil on the floor, yet she laughed at herself instead of panicking. It was messy, imperfect, real, and she felt for the first time in her life a small flicker of satisfaction. She thought of Kwesi, imagining him back at his farm, smiling perhaps at the success of the lesson, and a tear rolled down her cheek, not of anger, but of newfound understanding. Life, she realized, would not be perfect, and neither should she demand it of others. It would be messy, flawed, and yet beautiful in ways she had never allowed herself to see. The village elders, observing from a distance, nodded quietly among themselves. Their plan had worked. The proud girl who demanded perfection had finally been humbled, and the seeds of empathy, humility, and awareness were being sown in her heart. Abeni's journey was just beginning, and though the road ahead would be filled with challenges, she would now walk it with eyes open, learning to value people not for their flaws or virtues alone, but for the love and effort they carried within them. The following morning, Abeni woke with a sense of heaviness pressing on her chest, yet beneath it stirred the first glimmer of curiosity about life beyond her vanity. She watched Nyasha fetch water from the village stream, muscles taut and hands worn by labor, and for the first time, envy was replaced by admiration. The younger sister's quiet diligence contrasted sharply with Abeni's past obsession with beauty and idleness, and a strange humility settled in her heart. Abeni's steps were hesitant as she followed Nyasha's path, carrying her own small bucket, and she realized how alien this world of honest labor had always seemed to her. Each sip of cool river water, each clumsy step along the muddy path, reminded her that life was not meant for perfection, but for participation, for giving effort where effort was needed. By midday, she attempted small chores in the compound, sweeping the courtyard, sorting yams, preparing simple food for the family. Her hands, once pampered and tender, now bore faint scratches and roughened patches from work, a discomfort that brought a new sense of respect for Nyasha's endurance. Villagers passing by observed her quietly, some shaking their heads in surprise, others nodding subtly, recognizing the first stirrings of change in the once proud young woman. Abeni did not seek praise. In fact, she no longer looked for admiration. She felt an internal shift, a seed of understanding that her worth could not be measured by fleeting beauty or the fleeting attention of men, but by her ability to contribute, to care, to live within the reality that shaped her village. That afternoon, Mama Zainabu called Abeni to sit beside her. "Child, do you understand now why life is teaching you this way?" she asked softly, her eyes heavy with both love and caution. Abeni nodded slowly, tears brimming in her eyes. She recalled each man she had rejected: the humble farmer, the carpenter, the doctor, the teacher, men who had offered their honesty, their hearts, and who would have nurtured her with love rather than idolizing her beauty. The shame was almost unbearable, yet it was mixed with a strange relief, as if a heavy veil had been lifted from her eyes. For the first time, Abeni began to understand that perfection was a trap, that chasing it had blinded her to true human worth. That evening, as the village quieted and the stars appeared over Ilara, Abeni stepped outside to sit beneath the old mango tree, where she had once recited impossible standards for a husband. Now, the tree stood not as a place of pride, but as a witness to her awakening. She watched the children play, the women chat, and the men walk by, their simple lives filled with work, joy, struggle, and resilience. She felt a soft humility grow inside her, a recognition that life's beauty was in its imperfections, its challenges, and its real human connections. And as she lay on her mat that night, exhausted yet contemplative, she whispered a silent promise to herself. She would no longer judge others by superficial standards. She would no longer reject genuine love for illusions, and she would learn to live humbly, appreciating the value in things beyond the surface. The next morning, Abeni rose before the sun, not to admire herself, but to help Nyasha fetch water from the stream. feeling awkward with the heavy bucket in her hands, but strangely alive in the cool morning air. Each step across the muddy path reminded her of the strength she had scorned, the endurance she had never valued. As she poured water into the clay pots at the compound, Mama Zainabu watched with quiet satisfaction, seeing her daughter's hands, once delicate and pampered, now acquiring the first faint lines of resilience. The village women noticed too, whispering among themselves as they went about their business in the market. The proud girl had begun her journey into humility. Abeni, aware of their eyes but no longer caring for admiration, felt a new sense of freedom. She began to understand that being useful, being part of the rhythm of life, was far more satisfying than receiving praise for superficial beauty. By mid-morning, Abeni joined the women in the market to sell vegetables and yams, performing each task awkwardly but with care, correcting her mistakes without anger or frustration. Children passed by calling out greetings, and for the first time she answered with genuine warmth rather than a dismissive smile. She noticed their laughter, their simple joys, and felt her heart lighten. Even the men who had once been humiliated by her sharp tongue watched cautiously, some smiling faintly, sensing a change. The world was no longer a stage where she must appear flawless. It was real, and in this reality, Abeni began to learn the true value of patience, hard work, and humility. That afternoon, as the sun's heat softened the village pathways, Abeni attempted to cook a simple meal. The beans boiled unevenly, the palm oil splattered. Yet she laughed at herself for the first time in years, appreciating the small victories in imperfection. Mama Zainabu, sitting nearby, reminded her gently, "It is not about doing everything perfectly, child, but about giving your heart to what you do. That is what people respect, not beauty alone." The words sank deeply. Abeni reflected on her past arrogance, on each man she had rejected for minor flaws, and the lesson hit her with clarity. Love and life could never be measured by superficial standards. They required patience, understanding, and empathy. By evening, the village square was filled with the soft sounds of daily life. Women chatting, children playing, animals moving about. And Abeni sat quietly under the mango tree, observing them with a new perspective. She thought of Kwesi, realizing that his lesson, though harsh, had been necessary. Without his departure and the ruse that had exposed her pride, she might never have opened her eyes. Now, she was beginning to grasp the wisdom her mother had tried to impart for years. Life was neither perfect nor kind in the way she had imagined, but it was rich with lessons for those willing to see beyond appearances. For the first time, Abeni felt a humility that was not shameful, but liberating. A quiet strength that came from understanding the value of imperfection and the power of real human connection. The following days in Ilara passed slowly but meaningfully for Abeni. Each one a careful step along a path she had never imagined walking. She began waking with the sun, not to preen or admire herself, but to participate in the daily rhythm of village life, learning tasks she had once scorned. She carried water, swept the compound, tended to small gardens, and helped her mother cook simple meals. Fumbling often but persisting, understanding that effort mattered far more than perfection. The villagers watched this transformation with quiet interest. Those who had once feared her arrogance now approached cautiously, offering advice, sharing laughs, and in some cases, nodding in approval at the first signs of humility in Abeni's eyes. She no longer sought admiration. Instead, she focused on understanding the people around her and her role within their lives. One afternoon, she went to the river with Nyasha to collect water, her hands now strong and calloused, her mind reflecting on every moment of pride she had once worn like armor. Children splashed in the water, shouting and laughing, and for the first time Abeni laughed along, free from the need to appear flawless. A woman nearby, who had once whispered warnings about Abeni's arrogance, smiled softly and handed her a small basket of vegetables, saying, "You see, child, life teaches those who listen." Abeni felt a warmth she had never known, a connection not based on beauty or status, but on simple kindness and mutual respect. She began to understand that her previous rejections of men like Kamau, Seifu, and the others had been driven by superficiality, not wisdom, and the realization sank deep into her soul. By evening, as the village settled into calm, Abeni returned to the compound to cook supper for her family. The rice she prepared was uneven, the stew slightly salty, yet she smiled at her effort. Proud not of perfection, but of persistence, Mama Zainabu watched, her eyes shining with cautious relief, and whispered, "This is the beginning, child. You are learning what truly matters." That night, Abeni reflected on her journey so far, realizing that her obsession with perfection had blinded her to the beauty of imperfection, the strength of hard work, and the quiet love of those who had cared for her despite her pride. She resolved that she would continue learning, that she would seek to rebuild trust and connections, and that one day she would honor the men she had once dismissed by living with humility and gratitude. As darkness fell over Ilara, Abeni sat under the old mango tree once more, listening to the rustle of leaves and the distant sounds of animals, and a sense of peace settled over her. The lessons were harsh, but they were hers, and for the first time she felt the quiet joy of understanding the value of imperfection, empathy, and real love. The village itself seemed to breathe with her newfound awareness, as if acknowledging that the proudest child had finally begun to walk the path of wisdom. As the days turned into weeks, Abeni's transformation became more evident to everyone in Ilara. She no longer wore her finest cloths to the market. Instead, she dressed simply, letting her hands and face reflect the work she now embraced. Each morning she rose with the sun to fetch water, sweep the compound, and help Nyasha prepare food. And each task, no matter how small, strengthened a part of her that had long been dormant: patience, diligence, and humility. Villagers began to treat her differently, offering smiles, gentle guidance, and quiet encouragement. Sensing the change in the once proud girl who had rejected so many suitors, Abeni listened to them now, absorbing the wisdom of those she had previously considered beneath her attention. And with each interaction, she felt the weight of her old arrogance lighten. One afternoon, while preparing cassava fufu, Abeni's thoughts wandered to the men she had once spurned. She remembered Kamau's shy smile, Sefu's patient explanations, and the other good men whose only fault had been imperfection in the eyes of a girl obsessed with flawless appearances. Tears pricked her eyes as she realized how many opportunities for genuine love she had discarded, and a deep sense of remorse settled in her chest. Yet this remorse was tempered by the knowledge that she could now act differently, that she could embrace humility and kindness moving forward. It was a painful lesson, but it was hers to carry, and she resolved never to forget it. That evening, Mama Zainabu called Abeni to sit beside her. "Child, I see that you are learning," she said softly, placing a hand on Abeni's shoulder. "The journey is long, but every day you grow stronger in heart and mind. Remember, life is not about perfection, it is about care, effort, and love." Abeni nodded, her eyes glistening, understanding finally that her previous pride had isolated her from the very life she desired. She spent the night reflecting under the mango tree, listening to the distant laughter of children, the soft cooing of birds, and the steady hum of the village at rest, realizing that these simple rhythms held more beauty than any mirror, makeup, or borrowed wealth ever could. The next morning, she joined the women in the market, helping them weigh yams, sort vegetables, and greet customers politely. She stumbled often, but her mistakes were met with patience from the women, who had begun to forgive and even admire her efforts. Abeni found joy not in being praised, but in contributing in being part of the pulse of her village, and each small success built the foundation of a new self, one that valued honesty, work, and genuine connection over empty beauty. By the end of the day, she returned to her mother's compound exhausted but fulfilled, a feeling entirely new to her, and as she lay down to sleep, she whispered quietly to herself, "I will not let pride guide my life again. I will choose reality, kindness, and love." In the mornings that followed, Abeni began to notice the rhythm of life in Ilara with a clarity she had never possessed. She woke before the sun, not to perfect herself in front of a mirror, but to prepare for the day's work alongside her mother and Nyasha. She learned to carry water carefully without spilling, to light fires for cooking without fear of burning her skin, and to chop vegetables with steady hands, no longer concerned with displaying skill for others. Every small accomplishment, whether successfully cooking a meal or finishing her chores on time, brought a quiet satisfaction she had never known. The villagers, initially cautious in their interactions with her, began to include her in conversations and invite her into activities she had once scoffed at. And she felt a growing sense of belonging. One afternoon, she went to the village square, carrying baskets of vegetables to sell, and saw men she had previously rejected walking past. Instead of dismissing them with haughty smiles or sharp words, she greeted them politely, exchanging words of friendship and apology for her past arrogance. Kamau, the farmer she had scorned for his rough hands, smiled gently at her, and Seifu, the carpenter, offered a nod of acknowledgement. Their warmth and patience touched her, and she realized that they had never been flawed in the ways she imagined. They had only been real, genuine, and willing to love her for who she was. The shame of her previous rejection mingled with gratitude for their continued presence in the village, and she began to see the value of sincerity over superficial perfection. That evening, Abeni returned home to find Mama Zainabu waiting for her, a gentle smile on her face. "Child, you are changing," she said softly. "The path is not easy, but you are learning to see what truly matters. Remember, a good heart is worth more than flawless beauty, and kindness is a treasure no wealth can buy." Abeni nodded, feeling a deep sense of understanding settle in her chest. She went to her room, lit a small lamp, and sat quietly, reflecting on the weeks that had passed since Kwesi's lesson. She realized that the village's orchestrated plan, though painful, had taught her a truth she could never have learned otherwise. Life is imperfect, people are flawed, and love is found not in perfection, but in acceptance, patience, and effort. The next day, she joined Nyasha at the river to collect water, smiling at the children playing along the banks. She helped a young boy untangle his fishing line, laughed when a goat ran past and knocked over a basket, and carried her load back to the compound with steady determination. For the first time, she felt a joy unconnected to vanity or admiration. She understood that her true worth lay not in the beauty she had prized for so long, but in her willingness to participate in the life around her and contribute with sincerity. That night, as she lay beneath the mango tree and watched the stars, Abeni whispered a promise to herself. She would live humbly, love openly, and never again seek perfection at the cost of truth or connection. Days turned into weeks, and Abeni's transformation became more visible to the villagers. She moved through Ilara with a quiet purpose, no longer seeking attention or admiration, instead focusing on contributing meaningfully to her family and community. She helped Nyasha tend to the garden, repaired fences with careful hands, and learned to cook meals that, though imperfect at first, were made with love and care. Villagers began to approach her with small tasks, sharing stories and advice, and she received their guidance with gratitude rather than disdain. The women in the market, who had once whispered criticisms behind her back, now offered encouragement, some even asking her to teach younger girls the lessons she was learning firsthand. Abeni felt a sense of belonging she had never known, a connection rooted in genuine effort rather than beauty or status. One afternoon, as she prepared yams for dinner, she reflected on the men she had once rejected, Wall, Biodan, and the others, and realized the depth of her folly. Each had been honest, hardworking, and capable of loving her with sincerity, yet she had turned them away in pursuit of an illusion. Her pride had cost her the chance at real happiness, and the weight of that realization pressed heavily on her. Still, Abeni's remorse was tempered by determination. She resolved to honor those lessons through her actions, by treating others with respect and kindness, and by recognizing the value in imperfection. That evening, the village elders gathered to discuss the changes in Abeni. Mama Zainabu had spoken to them privately, praising her daughter's growth and acknowledging that the lessons of the staged marriage were taking root. The elders nodded in approval, recognizing the transformation as genuine, and agreed to support Abeni as she continued on this path. They reminded themselves that pride, once broken, could give way to wisdom if nurtured carefully, and they hoped her example would inspire other young women in Ilara. Later that night, Abeni sat beneath the mango tree, listening to the hum of village life and reflecting on her journey. She thought of Kwesi, imagining him tending his fields and laughing quietly at the outcome of his lesson. Though she had been humiliated, she now understood that it was necessary for her growth. Her beauty, once the center of her identity, had become secondary to her character, her actions, and her capacity for empathy. For the first time, she felt a sense of purpose that did not depend on admiration or perfection. She whispered to herself, "I will live for truth, for kindness, and for love, not for vanity or appearances." Over the following weeks, Abeni's life in Ilara settled into a steady rhythm. She woke early each morning to help Nyasha tend the garden and fetch water, no longer avoiding labor, but embracing it with a sense of purpose. Her hands, once soft and pampered, were now roughened by work. And each scratch, each blister, reminded her of the lessons she had learned through humility and effort. The villagers took notice of her transformation. Men she had previously scorned now greeted her warmly, some offering advice or assistance, and women in the market began to treat her with genuine respect rather than cautious curiosity. Abeni, in turn, responded with gratitude and a newfound patience, recognizing that relationships required effort, understanding, and acceptance rather than superiority. One afternoon, while helping to repair a fence near the village outskirts, she encountered Wall, the man she had publicly insulted months ago. Her heart tightened at the memory of her cruelty, but she approached him humbly, bowing her head slightly. "Wall," she said softly, "I was wrong before. I judged too harshly. You and others like you deserved respect and kindness, not my pride." Wall studied her carefully, then nodded with quiet understanding, saying, "Abeni, actions speak louder than words. Let us see how your heart has changed." Though he did not immediately offer friendship, Abeni felt a weight lift from her chest. She realized that rebuilding trust would take time, patience, and consistency, but she was willing to endure it. That evening, Mama Zainabu called Abeni to sit beside her under the moonlit sky. "Child, every day you learn more," she said, her voice warm yet firm. "You are beginning to understand that life's value lies not in beauty, possessions, or perfection, but in effort, humility, and love. Keep walking this path and you will find contentment you have never known." Abeni nodded, tears glistening in her eyes, feeling both gratitude and determination. She began to understand that real happiness did not come from admiration, wealth, or appearances. It came from sincerity, from connections, and from contributing meaningfully to the lives of others. The next day, Abeni joined Nyasha at the market, selling vegetables and goods with careful attention and a humble smile. She helped younger girls learn how to measure and sell items, offering guidance she once would have mocked. Villagers noticed her patience and diligence, and whispers of approval replaced the previous murmurs of judgment. Abeni felt a quiet satisfaction, not born of vanity, but of a genuine understanding of her role in the community. By nightfall, she returned to the compound exhausted but fulfilled, reflecting beneath the mango tree as the stars shimmered above. She realized that the lessons from Kwesi's plan were far more valuable than any luxury or fleeting admiration she had once pursued, and for the first time she felt a sense of purpose and belonging, rooted in reality, humility, and true human connection. By now, Abeni's presence in Ilara had shifted from that of a proud, untouchable figure to a young woman respected for her humility and effort. She no longer shied from work, and the villagers began to see her as someone who had learned the value of perseverance and sincerity. Each morning she helped Nyasha with the garden, fetching water, tending to animals, and preparing meals, no longer seeking admiration, but focusing on contributing meaningfully to her family and community. Even the children, who had once whispered about her vanity, now ran to greet her warmly, enjoying her gentle guidance as she taught them how to carry water, tend small plants, and respect the routines of village life. Abeni felt a quiet joy in these interactions, a feeling far richer than any praise for her beauty had ever been. One afternoon, while walking through the market carrying a basket of yams, she noticed Seifu, the carpenter, carefully arranging his wooden stools for sale. She approached him respectfully, offering a smile and a few words of apology for her past arrogance. Seifu studied her for a moment, then nodded, a faint smile appearing on his face. "Actions speak louder than words," he said gently. Abeni felt relief and hope swell inside her. She understood that rebuilding trust with those she had wronged would take time and consistent effort, but she was committed to proving her sincerity through her deeds rather than her appearance. That evening, Mama Zainabu called Abeni to sit beside her under the stars. "Child, the heart you are cultivating now will serve you well," she said softly. "Remember, life is not about perfection, but about compassion, humility, and the willingness to learn from mistakes. You are growing stronger every day, not because you are beautiful, but because you are becoming wise." Abeni listened quietly, letting the words settle deep within her. She thought of Kwesi's lesson, of the orchestrated plan that had exposed her arrogance, and she felt gratitude rather than anger. Without it, she realized, she may never have understood the true meaning of love, humility, and connection. The next day, Abeni returned to the market, helping other women sell their goods, guiding younger girls, and working alongside Nyasha without complaint. Her interactions with the villagers grew warmer, marked by patience and attentiveness. She realized that life in Ilara was not about seeking perfection or status, but about building relationships, learning from those around her, and contributing honestly to her community. By nightfall, she returned home to prepare dinner, her hands tired, but her spirit lighter than it had ever been. Sitting beneath the mango tree after her chores, she reflected on the journey she had taken, from pride and vanity to humility and understanding, and whispered to herself, "I will live with kindness, patience, and love, valuing people for who they are, not for the perfection I once demanded." As the days passed, Abeni's life in Ilara settled into a rhythm of meaningful work and sincere interactions. She no longer sought attention or admiration, and the villagers began to recognize her efforts and genuine change. Each morning she rose with the sun, helping Nyasha in the garden, fetching water, and tending to the household chores. Her hands, once delicate and pampered, now bore calluses that told the story of effort and persistence. With every task completed, she felt a quiet pride. Not the shallow pride of beauty, but the deep satisfaction of contributing to the lives of others. The villagers, initially wary, now treated her with warmth and respect. Women in the market invited her to share advice with younger girls, and even men she had previously rejected acknowledged her sincerity. One afternoon, while preparing cassava for dinner, Abeni thought of the men she had once scorned: Wall, Seifu, Kamau, and the others. She reflected on their patience, their willingness to love her honestly, and the humility they had carried despite her arrogance. The shame she felt was tempered by understanding. She realized that her pursuit of perfection had blinded her to the goodness around her. Now, she sought to honor them not through words, but through her actions, treating others with respect, showing humility, and contributing honestly to the life of the village. That evening, she walked to the river with Nyasha to collect water, laughing freely as the children played and the goats wandered past, feeling a joy rooted in reality rather than appearances. Back at the compound, Mama Zainabu watched her daughter with quiet satisfaction. "Child, the lessons you have learned are deep and lasting," she said softly. "You have begun to see that life is about effort, love, and patience, not perfection. Continue on this path, and you will find a peace that your beauty alone could never give." Abeni nodded, understanding that her journey was far from over, but confident that she was now walking in the right direction. That night, she sat beneath the mango tree, reflecting on the weeks since Kwesi's plan had forced her to confront her pride. She realized that her beauty, once her pride, was no longer her identity. Instead, her worth would now be measured by her actions, her humility, and her ability to love and connect with others. In the days that followed, Abeni actively participated in village life, helping neighbors, guiding younger children, and working alongside the women in the market. Her mistakes were met with patience rather than ridicule, and she responded with gratitude and persistence. Slowly, she began to rebuild relationships with the villagers she had once scorned, understanding that trust and respect were earned, not demanded. Each small success reinforced her transformation, and she began to feel a sense of belonging she had never known. By night, as she sat beneath the mango tree, she whispered to herself, "I will no longer chase illusions. I will value people, effort, and love. Perfection is nothing, kindness is everything." By now, Abeni had fully embraced her new life in Ilara. The villagers no longer saw her as the proud, vain girl who rejected suitors for minor flaws, but as a young woman who had learned humility, patience, and the value of real human connection. Each morning, she worked alongside Nyasha in the garden, carried water, tended the animals, and helped her mother with cooking and household chores. Her hands were strong and calloused, a testament to her commitment to contribute meaningfully to the community. Children ran to greet her with laughter. Women sought her guidance in the market, and even the men she had once scorned acknowledged her sincerity and growth. Abeni felt a quiet joy she had never known, rooted not in admiration or beauty, but in effort, kindness, and meaningful relationships. One afternoon, while sitting by the river and watching children play, Abeni reflected on all the men she had previously rejected: Wall, Sefu, Kamau, and the others, and the realization of what she had lost washed over her. Their honesty, patience, and willingness to love her genuinely had been gifts she had thrown aside in her pursuit of perfection. Tears filled her eyes, not from self-pity, but from understanding the depth of her past mistakes. She whispered a promise to herself. She would never again let vanity or pride blind her to the value of real human connections. Her heart now recognized that perfection was an illusion, while love, effort, and kindness were the true treasures of life. That evening, Mama Zainabu called Abeni to sit beneath the mango tree. "Child, you have walked the path of learning," she said softly. "You now understand that life is imperfect, and that real worth is found in humility, kindness, and sincerity. You have changed, and in doing so you have grown stronger, wiser, and more capable of love than ever before." Abeni nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks, feeling a profound sense of peace. She realized that the harsh lessons orchestrated by Kwesi and the villagers, though difficult, had been necessary to awaken her to the truths she could never have learned on her own. In the following days, Abeni continued to live with humility and purpose. She helped neighbors, guided younger children, and worked diligently in the market. She reconnected with the men she had once rejected, not seeking romance, but offering respect and kindness, acknowledging their patience and sincerity. The villagers admired her transformation, and she finally understood that life's true beauty lay not in appearances or wealth, but in effort, empathy, and love. Sitting beneath the mango tree each night, she whispered to herself, "Perfection is nothing. Kindness, love, and sincerity are everything. I will live for these, and I will never forget the lessons I have learned." Abeni's journey, though born of pride and vanity, ended with wisdom and understanding. She had wanted perfection, yet found it only an illusion. In seeking reality, humility, and connection, she discovered true beauty and the richness of life. The villagers, witnessing her growth, celebrated not only her change, but the lesson she embodied: that chasing perfection blinds the heart, while embracing imperfection opens it to love, empathy, and lasting happiness. This story reminds us that perfection is an illusion, and seeking it in others or ourselves can blind us to the beauty of real life. True happiness comes from humility, kindness, and valuing people for who they are, not for how flawless they appear. The lessons Abeni learned teach us to embrace imperfection, to cherish sincere connections, and to choose love over pride. Remember, the people you might overlook today could be the ones who bring joy, wisdom, and blessings into your life tomorrow. Always value heart over appearance, effort over perfection, and reality over illusions. If you like this story, make sure you subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share with your friends and family so you don't miss the next powerful story coming your way. Drop a heart in comment, like and subscribe my channel, and visit my channel for more interesting story videos.